Hey, well met, travelers. Thanks for stopping by my channel. My name's Bob of the Old Ways. I appreciate it a whole lot. If you're new here, welcome. If you're not new here, welcome back. Today, I'm going to be talking about the Chronicles of Narnia movies that are coming from Netflix and Greta Gerwig. They're scheduled to start shooting in July of this year, with a release of the first film scheduled for November of 2026. So we got a ways to go, but we already have some casting rumors to talk about. And the first salvo, as far as I can tell, in the culture war that is almost certainly going to grow up around this project. Because the Chronicles of Narnia, very much like The Lord of the Rings, my other favorite fantasy franchise as a kid, is conservative coded and Christian coded in the United States. I don't know if that's true for the rest of the world, but here in the US, starting back in the 1980s or so, right-wing conservatives and even farther right people began colonizing the fandoms of Narnia and Middle-earth. And we now have a couple generations of Americans who've grown up basically thinking that these two properties in particular belong to conservatives. Now, I don't want to wade too much into the politics there, but that is kind of in the background of what's going on. So what I'm going to look at today is some casting rumors that we have for the upcoming project by Greta Gerwig, and what appears to be, as far as I can tell, an article that is the first salvo in the culture war that is almost certainly going to grow up around the Chronicles of Narnia, particularly among a set of content creators here on YouTube, whom I have referred to as the Pakleds, but who some of my compatriots in other forums have called chuds. Anyway, we'll talk more about that later. For right now, let's talk about the Chronicles of Narnia casting news. Now, traditionally, visual adaptations of Narnia have begun and often ended with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which makes sense because that was the first book published in the series and remains the most popular and most well-known book in the series. So that's a logical starting point. However, in universe, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is not the first book of the series. It was the first book published, but it's not the first book in the story. That place of pride belongs to The Magician's Nephew, which was the sixth book published, but is a prequel to the rest of the series. So it's about like the creation of Narnia and the backstory a little bit of the White Witch Jadis, who was the villain in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And it appears from the casting rumors we're getting that Greta Gerwig is starting with The Magician's Nephew, something that no other adaptation of Narnia has ever done. Usually, like I said, it begins with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I think the farthest anyone has ever gotten has been The Silver Chair. I could be wrong about that, but no one's ever gotten to the last battle, as far as I know. So let's take a look at the news and see if we can discern whether it actually is going to be The Magician's Nephew. Spoiler alert, that seems to be the consensus among fans right now. So I'm looking at this headline on winteriscoming.net. I have found winteriscoming.net to be a pretty reliable source, a pretty good aggregator of news about fantasy media. They often, rather than just giving like the bare bones of a report, will give you some background of like lore and that sort of stuff about the particular property. So the first bit of casting news we got, at least the big bit of the first big bit of casting rumors that we got was this one. Greta Gerwig wants Charli XCX in her Chronicles of Narnia movies. Now, I have to confess, I'm not terribly familiar with Charli XCX's music. I looked up her stuff, and I have to say I'm quite fond of this video. But I don't really know her music very well, and I'm not sure what kind of an actor she is. However, I do trust Greta Gerwig. She's never made a bad movie, and her casting choices, while often baffling when you first hear about them, have always seemed to work when you see the final product. So I kind of trust Greta Gerwig's judgment here. But this article asks, is the brat singer about to step through the wardrobe into a magical land? So let's check this out. Here we go. It says, Is Charli XCX about to step through the wardrobe into Narnia? According to Deadline, the British singer is in talks to star in the upcoming Netflix adaptation of the Chronicles of Narnia and is among top choices to have a key role. Directed by Little Women filmmaker Greta Gerwig, pre-production has started on the first movie adapting C.S. Lewis's classic children's books and has gathered speed as it enters its casting phase. Recently, there was a casting call for a boy and a girl aged 10 and 11 years, presumably to play the young heroes in these stories. And now it looks like they could be joined by Charli XCX. So let's talk about that bit right there. A casting call went out for a boy and a girl aged 10 to 11 years. Now, the article I saw said that the casting call was for two child actors in the age range of 12 to 14 who would be playing children aged 10 and 11. And the fact that they put out a casting call for only two children is kind of a big giveaway, because that is Diggory and Polly, the child protagonists of The Magician's Nephew. So I saw that and I immediately raised my eyebrows, and this immediately had my attention. Charli XCX, I don't know about her, but that got me, because the Magician's Nephew is, I think, I'm rereading the Chronicles of Narnia right now, and I'm reading them in publication order, so I haven't gotten back to The Magician's Nephew yet, but I remember it being one of my favorite books in the entire series. So this excited me quite a bit. Anyway, let's continue. The singer is best known for her hit songs like Apple and Guess, but she's been looking to break into the movie business for a while and is set to produce and star in The Moment for independent studio A24, which is based on the singer's own original idea, though plot details are still under wraps. She's already got a working relationship with Gerwig, having provided the song Speed Drive for the soundtrack of her 2023 box office smash, Barbie. Naturally, there's been speculation about who she could potentially play in the Narnia franchise. The most likely choice seems to be Jadis, the White Witch. Yep, that's what I thought too. This would fit if Gerwig is indeed filming the series in chronological order, starting with The Magician's Nephew, as Jadis appears in that book as the main antagonist, being found by the two children, Diggory and Polly, and transported from her own world of Charn into Narnia. Of course, in the book, there's a brief but important detour into London, but we'll get to that, I'm sure. She also appears in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, again as the main villain, ruling over the land by force and covering it in endless winter. This makes this article a good fit for Winter is Coming. There aren't really many more characters in the first two books who would be a fit otherwise, unless she's being considered for a voice role to play one of the talking animals or mythical creatures, or else some big changes are being made in the stories in adaptation to bring in some new characters. There's one other woman she could be playing, which is, I cannot remember her name. She's the first queen of Narnia. Frank is the cab driver, and then his wife, or the woman who becomes his wife. I got to reread the book again, but she could be playing that person. But given her look, I think Charli XCX would probably be playing Jadis. If you know anything about the description of Jadis before she was the White Witch, like her physical description, Charli XCX is a pretty good fit. The article continues. It's important to state that as yet, this is all still up in the air, as nothing's been finalized yet, but Greta Gerwig is expected to start filming her first movie set in the Fantasyland this July, so we should get confirmation soon if Charli XCX was successful, and should also be getting plenty more updates on who else has been cast in the adaptation as the production moves along. Right, so that is the end of that article. I don't think there's much more to add there, except that this picture of Charli XCX is kind of giving witchiness, right? That's giving witch right there. So if she's in the movie, which is again not verified, she'd be a perfect fit for Jadis. But this wasn't the only big casting rumor we got. We also got what is potentially, I think, an even bigger one, and it's this one right here. Also on winteriscoming.net, Daniel Craig in talks to join Netflix's Narnia movies, but who will he play? The James Bond actor is being sought by Netflix for their upcoming adaptation of the Chronicles of Narnia, potentially playing the role of Uncle Andrew in The Magician's Nephew. Now that's pretty good casting. I mean, look at the guy. He's the right age for sure. Uncle Andrew is kind of an eccentric character, and I could see Daniel Craig playing him, given the choices that the career choices that Craig has made since abandoning the role of James Bond. But I think we're all aware of who else he could be playing, right? Right. Let's find out if this article mentions it. Okay. James Bond. Oh, that's an odd sentence. I guess it means the James Bond star. The James Bond star could be leaving this world far behind, as Deadline reports that Daniel Craig has been offered a role in Netflix's upcoming The Chronicles of Narnia movies. Details are scarce at the moment, and it's not clear whether Craig will accept the role or indeed who he will be playing, although What's on Netflix has heard he'll be playing the role of Uncle Andrew in The Magician's Nephew, the earliest book in the timeline. This fits with earlier speculation that Greta Gerwig would be adapting C.S. Lewis's 7-book series in chronological order, starting with Nephew, which was actually the 6th book published. The Magician's Nephew tells the prequel story about the creation of Narnia by Aslan the lion, a reference to the forming of the earth in the book of Genesis. Now, Aslan is the other character that Daniel Craig could be playing. If this is a voice casting, I'm unsure about that. I like Daniel Craig as an actor, but I'm not sure voice-wise that he has the gravitas to pull off Aslan. I don't know what his vocal range is like. I mean, Liam Neeson's voice is pretty iconic, but I'm willing to give Daniel Craig a chance if he is playing Aslan, although speculation is that he would be playing Uncle Andrew if he's in the movie. So anyway, the article continues. If this is the case, then unless it's a voice role, there aren't many other characters Craig could play besides Uncle Andrew Ketterley. He's a main character in the first book, the only one he appears in as the titular magician. He's an amateur magician who creates magical rings that allow the wearer to travel between worlds, which is how the first people travel to the magical world of Narnia. He could also be playing Frank, the first king of Narnia, but I think Uncle Andrew is a meatier role. I think Daniel Craig would get a lot out of that. Uncle Andrew is something of a villain in the story, ruthless and cunning, testing the rings out on his young nephew Diggory and his friend Polly, sending them into another world without knowing whether they'll be able to return. It's in this other world that the two children find Jadis, the White Witch, and transport her first to London before they all travel to Narnia just as it's being made by Aslan. Andrew is almost driven mad by the sight of talking animals and fantasy creatures, who he's convinced want to eat him. I guess there should be a spoiler warning for this article. I mean, spoiler warning for books that are, 70 years old now? An eccentric character, Andrew is described as tall and thin in the books with a head of wild hair, so Daniel Craig doesn't immediately spring to mind when imagining him. But in recent years, the actor's tried to distance himself from his most famous role as James Bond by taking on more outlandish roles, like the detective Benoit Blanc in Rian Johnson's Knives Out movies. So maybe he fancies stretching out in a new direction, playing an English eccentric in a fantasy film. I'm not sure I would describe Benoit Blanc as an outlandish role, but okay. At the moment, there's been no noise from Netflix or Craig's representatives about this casting rumor, and so far it's still up in the air whether he'll accept or not. This news comes on the heels of the reveal that British pop star Charli XCX was also in talks to have a role in the films, possibly as the White Witch. She seems an equally unconventional choice for the role. So this is what I think may have been getting referred to by the producer Amy Pascal when she said that it's all about the rock and roll, right? Amy Pascal's kind of a weirdo. I don't mean that as an insult, but if you see interviews with her, she's kind of the, flaky, artsy type, although she obviously has a head for business because she is a film producer. But what I'm getting up to with that is that it's kind of unclear what she meant when she said that this project was all about the rock and roll. But she also said that this was a fresh take on the Narnia franchise, which I took to mean at the time, most likely that they weren't starting in the traditional place of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and might be adapting another book instead. I was pulling for The Magician's Nephew, and it looks like we're getting The Magician's Nephew. So the article concludes with shooting expected to begin this summer for a Thanksgiving 2026 release. Things are heating up for the production, but there's still no hint as to who will be voicing Aslan, one of the most important characters who appears in all 7 books, but it's likely there will be more rumors in the coming weeks. Yes, almost certainly there will be. So these 2 casting rumors are pretty exciting to me. I like Daniel Craig as an actor, and I think I'm going to like Charli XCX. I'll like looking at her anyway. Oh, and the fact that they've confirmed that they're only casting 2 children's roles, at least that they've announced publicly, all adds up to The Magician's Nephew. So I'm super excited. While I know I'm not alone in being excited about this, there's a certain group of people out there who are not going to be excited about this. And I want to get out ahead of this one before they get to it, because if you're not aware, I built my channel basically on Rings of Power content, and I kind of stumbled into that. By the time I started making Rings of Power content, the culture war grift around Rings of Power was already in full swing, and I was always like behind the curve. This time, I don't think that's going to be the case, or I'm going to work to make sure that's not the case this time. When I first saw the news that Greta Gerwig was going to be making a Chronicles of Narnia adaptation, I started paying attention to what the Pakleds would be saying about it. And up until now, there hasn't been much of anything. I have a live stream that I'm still intending to edit into content, where I covered some initial opening shots at the adaptation by some of the usual suspects like RK Outpost and Geeks and Gamers, those types. But I didn't see any of them respond to the casting rumors that I'm talking about right now until this came along. So what I'm looking at right now is an article on a website called Fandom Pulse. Now you'll see a lot of the Pakled channels out there, your Nerdrotics, your Geeks and Gamers, your Josiah Rises, your Ryan Cannells, your Shadiversities. They will use this website like it's a regular news website. And what they will never tell you is that this website, Fandom Pulse, is kind of the next evolution of the site they all used to use, which was Bounding Into Comics. Because Fandom Pulse and Bounding Into Comics were both started by this guy, the author of this article, John F. Trent, right here, who is, how do I put this delicately? Kind of a right-wing lunatic. And if you ever read the articles on Bounding Into Comics that the Pakled channels would use, those channels, Nerdrotic, for example, would only ever read the articles a certain way in. They would not go through the entire article. They would just read enough to give you some slightly biased sounding coverage of the entertainment story they were talking about. And they would always stop before they got to the point in the article where the article dove right into outright Christian nationalism. And the Fandom Pulse website is very much like that. It is a conservative, right-wing propaganda outfit. It's not a unbiased entertainment news source. So keep that in mind. If you're new to this sphere and you start seeing content popping up from channels like Nerdrotic or Geeks and Gamers or The Critical Drinker or any of the other ones I mentioned, there's a whole ecosystem of these clowns out there. They will often use this website, Fandom Pulse, and they will pretend that they're looking at a neutral, unbiased news source, even though the text they're reading is completely framed through a right-wing political lens, and they all just pretend that it's not political. Anyway, rant over. John F. Trent of Fandom Pulse reacted to the rumor that Charli XCX was being cast in the Chronicles of Narnia. So let's take a look at what he said and compare it to the tone of the two articles I just read, the two aggregator articles I just read from winteriscoming.net. So this title seems pretty innocuous. Rumor: Charli XCX eyed for Greta Gerwig and Netflix's adaptation of C.S. Lewis's The Chronicles of Narnia. Sounds pretty neutral, right? It starts out that way too, a little bit. Let's see. The company added, quote, "The deal marks the first time that rights to the entire 7 books of the Narnia universe have been held by the same company." That's kind of a big deal. That's the other thing that excited me about this news. But you'll notice so far that Fandom Pulse here is playing it right up the middle, being, as neutral as possible and not really adding any commentary. They're really just aggregating and synthesizing quotes from other sources and not providing any original coverage. But that is going to change. Just follow along and watch. Douglas Gresham, Lewis's stepson, also stated, quote, "It is wonderful to know that folks from all over are looking forward to seeing more of Narnia, and that the advances in production and distribution technology have made it possible for us to make Narnian adventures come to life all over the world." Okay, you get the point. So there's a big chunk of this article, like maybe the first half of it or so, that can be read, basically right up the middle, basically as kind of neutral, not really adding original coverage, just aggregating content from other reportage. And it's up to about here that the channels I referred to earlier, not Netflix, Nerdrotic, etc., will usually stop reading about this far into a Fandom Pulse article, because what comes next is the heel turn. During the lead up to the release of Barbie, Gerwig revealed that she was attached to direct a film adaptation. That news was heavily criticized. No, it wasn't. Given Gerwig's endorsement and promotion of feminism with the Barbie movie, which stands in stark contrast to Christianity, of which C.S. Lewis made it clear his books were intended to promote. Okay? So notice, first of all, the clunky grammar there. You can tell that this article was actually written by John F. Trent, and everything else was basically copy-pasted into this article. But it's this idea right here, the idea that feminism stands in stark contrast to Christianity. No, it does not. I'm not going to rant about that here. I've ranted about it on my channel before, how so much of this right-wing content, this Pakled content, especially lately, is based on a false dichotomy, based on the implicit idea that there's a necessary contradiction between Christian values and whatever media it is they are complaining about, especially if that media has like queer people or people of color or diversity or anything like that in it. And no such contradiction exists. That is a lie. So this is the point in this article where the heel turn happens, and it goes from being like trying to portray itself as neutral and then revealing its hand and showing you that it's actually just right-wing political propaganda trying to colonize the minds of apolitical fans by inserting conservative talking points into what appears to be a political reportage about an entertainment property. So let's see how bad it gets. John F. Trent writes, quote, "Lewis wrote in On Stories and Other Essays on Literature, why did one find it so hard to feel as one was told one ought to feel about God or about the sufferings of Christ? I thought the chief reason was that one was told one ought to. An obligation to feel can freeze feelings, and reverence itself did harm. The whole subject was associated with lowered voices, almost as if it were something medical. But supporting that by casting all these things into an imaginary world, stripping them of their stained glass and Sunday school associations, one could make them, for the first time, appear in their real potency. Could one not thus steal past those watchful dragons? I thought one could," he concluded. Right? So that's just explaining C.S. Lewis's motivation for including the Christian themes that he did in this story. Because if you don't know, C.S. Lewis was a devout Christian. He converted to Anglicanism late in life. And that's important because Anglicanism is not evangelical white Christian nationalism. These are very different versions of Christianity. But white evangelical Christian nationalists in the US who colonized the Narnia fandom like to pretend that C.S. Lewis was one of them. Maybe I'll make a video if this becomes a big talking point in the culture war discussion. I'll make a video or something pointing out just how different C.S. Lewis's take on Christianity is from what we see in the American right-wing political sphere. But what John F. Trent is doing here is in reminding his readers that C.S. Lewis was a Christian and he included Christian themes in his Narnia stories, and therefore the screeching harpy feminist Greta Gerwig is a terrible choice to direct Narnia films because she's going to like force her ideology on them or something and wipe out the Christianity in the story. That's what he's going for here. So this is all like, again, just John F. Trent recycling other people's content. He's trying to keep his reader's eye focused on the false implication that there's a necessary contradiction between Greta Gerwig's feminism and C.S. Lewis's Christianity. The implication being that because Greta Gerwig is a feminist, she can't possibly be a Christian. I personally don't know if she still is a practicing or believing Christian or not, but it doesn't matter. John F. Trent, Fandom Pulse, is trying to drive home the idea that Greta Gerwig can't properly and faithfully adapt the Chronicles of Narnia because she is a feminist. And by implication, no one in modern Hollywood could do it either, because he thinks there's a necessary contradiction there between Christian values and Hollywood morality. But Hollywood has the same morality as the rest of the world. So the main point I wanted to get to here really is that there are reliable sources of entertainment news and there are unreliable sources of entertainment news. And the algorithm on YouTube is dominated by people who rely on unreliable sources. Sources like Fandom Pulse that are politically biased and are propaganda outfits, not legitimate sources of reportage about what's going on in the entertainment world. Now, I don't know if my prediction about Chronicles of Narnia becoming a culture war battlefront will pan out or not, but if it does, we've just been given a preview of what that is going to look like. A lot of these channels have, for the last, 10 years or so, been operating under the pretense that they are apolitical, and they don't talk much about the direct involvement of Christian nationalist propaganda in their own content. Some of them appear to not be aware that they are laundering Christian nationalism for a secular audience, but that is what they are doing. And with the re-election of Donald Trump, some of those guys have started taking their masks off and being more explicit about what they're doing. I've seen some of the Pakled channels passingly mention, for instance, the popularity of Lord of the Rings and Chronicles of Narnia among Christians, but they haven't said anything directly about their own religious beliefs or lack thereof. But again, their beliefs don't matter. What they're doing is propaganda that is intended to convince you, dear viewer, dear apolitical fan, who doesn't necessarily think about politics all the time. It's to convince you that right-wing politics is just apolitical common sense. And they do that by framing the story with particular kinds of rhetoric and by slipping the talking points in ways that you won't necessarily recognize if you're not like a politics nerd like I am and like other people who cover these channels are. Anyway, I'm going to stop rambling now. This has gone on long enough. I'm super excited about the Chronicles of Narnia adaptation. It's one of my favorite stories of all time. It was very formative to me as a kid. It played a big role in shaping the kind of person I am today. And I'm excited to see what Greta Gerwig, who has never made a bad movie, is going to do with it. So let me know what you think down in the comments, and do all the other offerings to the great God algorithm, the thumbs up and all that other stuff I'm somehow expected to always mention in every video, even though you're all grown-ups probably, and you're all digital natives, so you know how this platform works. So just do the thing. And until next time, Thank you for watching, and remember that what's best in life is to crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and engage in discourse with the women. Thanks for watching.